I try not to spend too much time like thinking about what our competitors are doing because at the end of the day, our mission is not to be the number one player in the no code space. Our mission is to enable everyone to build technology. I think in 5 to 7 years, aside from like crazy complicated AI use cases or like, live streaming VR, anything will be possible on the tool. Like there really won't be limitations in terms of the language itself.
This is Nicolas Carrol, a senior product manager at Bubble. He joined the company back in 2020 and led the team that was responsible for shipping Bubble's new responsive engine. As far as I'm concerned, Bubble's switch to a responsive system based on Flexbox has been the biggest win they've had on the product front in the last few years. And I wanted to speak with Nick in part to know more about what it was like to be part of that team. More than that though, I was curious to learn about how Nick's mind works and about how he approaches all of the challenges that come with building features for a product as massive and as complex as Bubble is. Together we discuss what a day in the life of a senior product manager at Bubble looks like, how his team prioritizes what features to build, and what Nick would spend his time working on if he had the keys to the company and all of Bubble's resources. If you're enjoying these conversations, make sure to like this video and to subscribe to the channel. You're listening to User Stories, episode number 7 with Nicolas Carrol. What is one thing that excites you most right now about the no-code space?
There's one thing that excites. I think that it's growing, right? Like I remember when I first started at Bubble almost 2 years ago, like no code certainly wasn't in my vocabulary. And saying things more like, yeah, you can build this without code. And now I feel like, no code has taken on a meaning that like lives outside of just the fact that you're not using code to build stuff, right? So just the difference in like recognition and excitement, it's become a lot more mainstream, I think. And so it's like whatever happens in the community, like updates that are made is amplified for everyone else. So like one new feature comes out or there's an article about a certain player in the space, it helps everyone, helps drive awareness to what, all these products, what no code is trying to achieve. And so, yeah, that's probably what excites me the most right now.
And on that note, you joined Bubble in 2020, right?
Yeah, December 2020.
December 2020. Okay. And so even since then, probably right around that time, at least for me, looking at all of the different things happening in the space, it seems like really things started to ramp up, and there's so many different tools now and different companies out there who are no-code companies that allow you to build products without code. And I'm curious, I guess, when it comes to your job and the things you do at Bubble, how much do you pay attention to these other platforms and what's going on in the space outside of Bubble? Like, are you regularly sampling these other platforms and seeing how they do product? And does that influence how you think about what you're doing at Bubble, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try not to spend too much time because there's two different things, right? There's like looking for inspiration and worrying about competition. And I try not to spend too much time like thinking about what our competitors are doing because at the end of the day, our mission is not to be the number one player in the no code space. Our mission is to enable everyone to build technology, right? To be involved, to be consumers, creators of what they would consume. And it's awesome that there are a lot of players that are kind of aiming to do the same thing. And everyone kind of has a different approach or a focus on different customers. And so I definitely look at a lot of no-code companies as not really competitors, but other folks that are looking to do like achieve a similar mission or achieve similar outcome with just different ways of approaching it. That being said, it's always interesting to see how other folks are looking to tackle this problem, right? You have to replicate the expressivity and power of a language that is infinitely, right? Like infinitely expressive. Like you can quite literally build anything with code. And, we as no code companies need to kind of give that power to our users. So it is very interesting seeing how different people like kind of approach that problem. And people take very different approaches where it's like really leaning into templates or blocks, or kind of bordering the low code route where it's a very like thin abstraction on top of technologies that you would use if you were programming with code. So yeah, I was gonna say there's certainly some inspiration there, but yeah.
I saw on I looked you up on LinkedIn, and you have a background in mechanical engineering, I think, right?
I do, yeah.
And you said that at the beginning of this conversation, you said something like no code wasn't really, I don't know if it was like on your radar, but before you joined Bubble, it seemed like your knowledge of the no code space, obviously was not as good as it is right now, but
Yeah.
what was it like for you before joining Bubble? And I guess, how does that mechanical engineering background help you with what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So I originally went to school for architecture and got a minor, and halfway through, was missing that more like technical piece of education. And so I ended up pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering, and then spent a year in industry after school. Did not end up really enjoying it. I found it pretty boring. Like you work to solve some really cool problems from first principles when you're in school, and then you get out into industry and it's like everything's a rule of thumb. Customers are very risk averse, and so you just end up like kind of rehashing things that have already been done before. At least that was my experience. It's certainly not the case for a lot of engineering, but I was pretty kind of disenfranchised by that, and had the opportunity to work in live music for a few years, and within that period came up with an idea for a startup, and it was specifically a software product. And so I went about it the hard way, right? Had this idea, I learned how to code, you know, did like self-taught, doing the different like code academy, and then discovering Ruby on Rails and all the, Hardle Rails tutorial, and creating that first Hello World app, and then a to-do app, and then right using those different pieces to like kind of create like the basic building blocks, having to learn about like database schemas and what that means, having to learn kind of like the entire technology stack, and brought a product to market, and it was really cool, but it was a lot of effort. And so unfortunately, pandemic kind of put the plans for anything in live music on hold. And so I started looking for other opportunities. And when I came across Bubble, it was kind of this light bulb moment, right? Where it was just like, if I had known about Bubble, in a few weeks, right, I could have had something that I was showing users instead of months. And just the amount of time that would have saved me in those early days when you're just trying to figure out like what you're doing. Like you don't really have a good idea of what your idea is yet. You think you do, but you don't. And so it's like until you like start working on something and getting it in front of people and iterating, like those cycles are just so much faster with Bubble. So yeah, it was really that like having this experience of like having done it the hard way and seeing what it could look like the easy way. And that's what's been so exciting working at Bubble, is that I identify so strongly with our customers. I mean, I always joke that I'm like Bubble's number one customer. So yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, it seems like you found Bubble in a way that's similar to the way many people find Bubble, where you're like building a product and you just kind of stumble upon it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that is knowing a bit of code. I don't know how deep you went with it, but is knowing code essential in your role at Bubble? I know that there's some product managers who don't know code who manage technical teams. How essential is it for you?
I wouldn't say it's essential. I think it definitely helps, right? Especially the teams that I'm on. But no, I don't think it's essential. There's kind of like a saying about product managers that they're spiky, right? Like you kind of have to be a generalist, but there's usually like one thing that you're kind of stronger at, whether that's like marketing, whether that's like engineering, whether that's like more on like the sales or growth side. And so having that understanding, that technical understanding for a technical product like Bubble, I think helps because I can relate to a lot of the concepts, but then also in conversations with the engineers on far more technical topics, can at least have like a basic understanding of what they're talking about. So I think it definitely helps. I don't know if it's essential. I would say the experience, like that entrepreneurial experience, has probably been the most helpful part of my background.
Your official title is Senior Product Manager, as far as I understand.
Yep.
And in my mind, that could mean a whole bunch of different things in terms of what you do from day to day. So I'm curious to get like just a breakdown of what a day in the life of a senior product manager at
Oh
Bubble looks
boy,
like for you. Oh
it's a lot of video calls.
yeah, yeah.
I'd love to know what the job was like before, everything was remote. I'm assuming it was kind of in and out of meetings a lot as well, but yeah, in our remote world, it ends up being a lot of video calls just because you spend most of your time coordinating between different teams, right? I kind of think like a lot of it you're leaning on the experts, and your role is to like decide what to build, when to build it, and who to build it for. And then you're really leaning on the experts to do the heavy lifting, right? Like the engineers are going to be writing the code, designers are going to be designing what the experience looks like, marketing is going to launch, sales is going to get it out to folks. And so you get to build alongside of people. And so with that, right, you're just spending a lot of time coordinating and talking to folks. So, I work on 2 different pods. And so kind of have like double the agile rituals, kind of double the overhead that comes along with being on a team. But at the same time, like the kind of the synergy that you get between like those 2 different teams working on different things that are still somewhat related is pretty cool. So yeah, a mixture of just like research and writing docs and talking to people, trying to get in front of users, like poring over amplitude charts and asking stupid questions is kind of what most of the days end up being.
I'm curious to know more about what those boundaries look like between different teams. You seem like someone who's a creative person, and I'm curious to know like when you're thinking about a new feature to add and you have this idea or you're prioritizing what to work on, is it tricky for you to hand that idea off to different teams? Like, do you find yourself wanting to, be maybe more involved with the design team when they're designing a new feature, or be more involved with the engineering team, maybe more than you should? Like, how do you manage those boundaries, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I'm a pretty collaborative person, and I think, my co-founder of that company I started was a designer. And so I learned, when you're two people, like you take what that other person is doing like very seriously, right? Because it's like a lifeline. And so learned how to really respect design and what product design means. And then having had to do a lot of engineering on my side and getting to like work with, again, when you're on a very small team, when you work with someone who's really good at what they do, you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like you do it so much better than I do. And so I guess I don't really have a hard time like handing off parts of like the product development cycle to those folks, because I really respect what they do and know like firsthand that they can do it way better than me. I love being a part of the discussions though. Like, and I think at Bubble, we work really closely with like design and engineering. We have very like product minded engineers, and same thing with designers, like some technical designers. And so like 3 of us getting into a room is a lot more collaborative and less about like, I own this, so I don't want to hear your opinion on that, or like I'm the design expert, so like I don't really need to hear engineering's take. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that totally does. It definitely does. Another, like when I think about your job, one of the things that I imagine would be the hardest is just listening to user feedback. I see you in the forum. I know what the forum's like. I'm in there less these days because I'm spending more time just bubbling. But I know that it is a passionate group of folks who all have sometimes very strong opinions on the direction or on what Bubble should be spending its time on. And beyond the forum too. When I first discovered Bubble, that really kind of was the place where everyone gathered to discuss whatever it was related to Bubble. But now in 2022, there's tons of stuff going on Twitter, on Facebook, on all of these different social platforms. And every single day, people are giving you feedback about the product that you're working on, the company you're working for. How do you manage that feedback? What does that process look like for you? How do you decide like what ideas are worth listening to and worth pursuing and what to maybe not pay as much attention to?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's always like the more feedback, the merrier, right? So even if it's negative feedback, that's still feedback, right? It's still going to help you out in some way. But yeah, learning how to interpret it, I think, is a pretty core part of a product manager's job. And so I think it's less about doing what the user is telling you and more so like, okay, well, what is the underlying reason for this feedback, right? So if they're asking for a specific feature request, like, I want to have a checkbox that allows me to do this. Cool, that might be one way to solve their problem. But like, why are they asking for that checkbox? What are they trying to do where they need that functionality? Is there another way that we can provide that functionality that doesn't involve that checkbox, but maybe it's like, it's something else, right? Or so it's like, trying to understand that underlying like impetus or the motivation for wanting that. And I think that allows you to draw trends between what you're hearing from other people. So they might be, everyone's asking for a different feature, but at the end of the day, they're trying to solve problem X. And, from our, knowledge, from our like point of view, maybe there's a more elegant way of doing that, or a way of doing that that kind of like also fits with what we've been prioritizing. So that's like one thing that's a really important skill I think that needs to be developed. And it's the same thing with good feedback and negative feedback. Like, I think you have to do the same thing. I mean, there are other times where the users are just plain correct. Like what they're asking for is like kind of what you need to do. And so another piece is just, it's like you need to have, I think, a strong sense of direction or like that North Star from which you're kind of like assessing that feedback against. And so if you have like a strong idea of where you want to go, and then all the feedback is pointing in a different direction, there's that moment where it's like, okay, well, what am I missing, right? Or do we know something that they don't? I don't know if that's the right way to say it. Do we know something that they don't? But like,
right. Does the mission kind of outweigh the feedback that you're receiving? Is it more important to go in the direction to be steadfast in that direction?
Yeah. And at a certain point, you need to make a decision and try it on, right? It's like you got to try on a decision before you know you made the right one or not. And so sometimes trying on that decision is releasing something. And, hopefully it's not breaking anything, but I think you'll find out very quickly, like, is this helping out or is this hurting? And that's where you get the best feedback, I think. So, and there are ways to get that feedback without even releasing anything, right? Just trying to get like mock-ups in front of a user or just learning a little bit more about some of the problems that they're running into. So if you can, like, you kind of have an idea of where you want to go, you make that decision. Hopefully that decision is informed by some level of user feedback. Then like getting it out there is the best way to validate whether you made the right decision or not. And, we need to be building for the long term, not necessarily the short term. So in the near term, right, it might not be well received, but if it's setting you up for something in the future, that's another thing that needs to be considered as well.
I'm curious if you have any examples that come to mind of a time when you were kind of caught right in the middle of a situation you just described there. So where your team felt like you were very clear about your mission and the direction that you wanted to go in, but you were receiving feedback that was maybe telling you to go in a different direction. Do any examples come to mind?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think like new responsive is a great example of that. Like the beta that we launched was very bare bones, right? And so you have a lot of people coming on and be like, like, what the fuck? Like this like, I don't get it, right? Like it's missing all this stuff, and I was able to build this before, I can't build that now. And we knew that going in, right? The whole point was to get something out that was like the very smallest thing we could do to kind of prove out this new direction of like basing our responsive design off of Flexbox rather than this algorithm that we had previously developed.
So how early are you talking about this? You're not talking about like the beta release back when we first met. The first time I met you was when you were demoing it to Bubble instructors. Are you
Yeah,
talking about that responsive engine?
yeah, talking
Man,
about that
that's so
one.
funny but that point in time, because that's so funny to hear you say that, because when you released it, I like it, it seemed in my mind like a massive project that you guys have been working on. And like, I mean,
Oh, it was. Yeah.
I guess there's no real way to like do a mini version of that. It seems like one of those things where you're kind of like, because it's just so different than what we had before, right?
Yeah, it was very different, but we were missing a ton of features, and and so like we spent the next 6 months building those out based on user feedback, right? And like
Mm.
what's important. You're thinking about like how big that is, like it's huge. You're making a lot of assumptions about like how the feature should be. By getting that early version out, we were able to be like, what we thought was important wasn't all that important. But this little thing that we thought wasn't going to be that important, turns out that's what everyone's asking for. And so we were
Mm.
able to really get the product to where it is, like in very tight cycles with the community that way. But yeah, I mean, there was certainly, there's thankfully a lot of people that really liked it. There was also like a fair amount of people who were like, I like the old system better. Like, I don't get it. But knowing that, hey, like we are aiming for 1-2 years down the road on this, it's not going to be something that's released and solved overnight. I think we got the product to a way better spot because it was out in front of users than if we had waited another year, right,
Mm.
to launch it when it was like more fully featured. I think we're seeing the same thing with, we're like teasing the component, or no, with our I shouldn't say component library yet, with color variables, like color and font variables. We released one font variable, 8 color variables, and it's like, this is so restrictive, like I need more colors. And it's like, yeah, I mean, 100%, but the fact that you're talking about it tells us everything we need to know. Like, you would find this feature valuable. And so the next step of that, right, we're about to launch the ability for users to generate their own variables and use those however they wish in their app. So that's another example of, I think, of like the, we could have waited a lot longer, but let's get something out and see what users are really saying about it.
Yeah, yeah. The responsive engine launch in particular, like when I think back on, I mean, for as long as I have been bubbling, I think that has been like the thing in my mind that I thought Bubble did perfect. As good as one could do, in the sense that it was like such a massive technical challenge. God only knows what you guys were doing behind the scenes with all the engine. Like, I can't imagine what that was like. And then I thought the rollout of it too. It's surprising to hear you talk about people who weren't so happy with it when it first came out, because as far as I can remember, everyone who I talked to was just like super stoked about it. It's this massive thing that people were waiting for, and I thought you guys knocked it out of the park. Anyways,
Well, thank you.
I'm curious. I'm yeah, of course. I'm curious to know, like, aside from what you just said about getting things out early, which I think is kind of like classic startup advice, really, right? Get
Yep.
things out,
Yep.
iterate fast. Are there other things that the success of that launch with the responsive engine taught you guys and informed how you approach future feature development at Bubble?
Yeah, I mean, I think that project was a watershed moment, might be too strong, but we learned a ton, right? That was the first big launch of something that we had done in a long time. And so just coordinating that, right? Just coordinating a release of something that big, all the people that you need to talk to, all the different stakeholders. Like, and we definitely missed, like, we have to consider all like the world of Bubble, like teaching, like education content that exists, right? This, all the new controls and the new like principles we're introducing kind of don't exist in all that. How do we handle that? We have bootcamp instructors, we have agencies, right? We have freelance developers. We have our own education team and all the content that we've created. Like, there's just so many different things. So that brought an awareness to all of that, right? And the mistakes that you made leading up to it, like, oh, I should have looped this person in sooner. Now we have kind of that roadmap. So we're gearing up to launch the component library. It's a lot smoother behind the scenes because we've kind of done it before. We came up with the idea to do like a live stream launch, and Q&A with folks, and like trailer video to really kind of like get build some excitement about what we're releasing. And that was a really cool moment, to kind of like speak to users with the team about what we had built. And then just like really underscoring the importance of like how important proof of concepts are when you're developing. I mean, Cal, the lead engineer on that project, probably spent like 4 or 5 months with different proof of concepts. We were trying out all these different ideas, like taking our existing algorithm and trying to like continue to tweak it, doing some like half and half approach, and then with this idea of basing everything on Flexbox and that proof of concept, and so like how important that is, how important it is to like phase out your releases as much as possible, right? Where you draw that line, I think is really important. And so that certainly informed how we handled like all the rollouts that are leading up to the component library. Like all the little tweaks and little things that we've been releasing over the past several months have all been building towards this moment, which probably wasn't apparent to any of our users, but it was something that we were tracking the whole way. So yeah, I think we learned a ton, and now we have like a lot of confidence behind being able to take on a huge project, something that took over a year and execute on it. So I think it was a cool moment.
How do you, I was thinking as you were speaking there, like, and I'm stoked about the component library, so don't, but what I was thinking is like, why the component library? I guess like, how do you choose what to prioritize? You're building this platform that's infinitely complex and you can go in an infinite number of ways. I guess how much of a role do you have in that in terms of choosing what to work on right now? How much of it is collaboration with the founding team, with Emmanuel and Josh? Like who sits down and makes that decision?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's cool about Bubble is that comes from a lot of different places. And so, but in general, we have kind of key company objectives. There are like big problems that are high priority to solve, and also small problems that are also priority to solve. And so, it's the PM's main job to like really understand the problems, understand which ones are worth solving, and then figuring out with the team how to go about and solve it. And so I think the component library was kind of a joint effort with like Josh, I think was the first person to introduce the idea of doing something like a component library to solve this problem that we had been kicking around, which was like what we call now the blank canvas problem, right? You sign up for Bubble, create an app, and then you land in this empty editor, and that blank screen is staring you in the face, and like, how do you even get started? And so the idea was like, if users don't know how to get started, they'll never see the value of Bubble and then they'll leave, right? But if we can kind of get the user started, kind of like not just instill some best practices, but very quickly understand the power of Bubble so that there's kind of this moment of like, okay, it is worth investing more of my time. And so that's where like the component library was born, was an attempt at solving that problem. And it's just, I don't think we fully solved the issue, but I think is like a pretty big bet on getting closer to solving that problem.
I've never spoke one-on-one with Josh or Emmanuel. I hope to one day interview both of them on this podcast. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
But I want to play a little thought experiment here. So,
okay,
like imagine if they both came up to you and said, Nick, you have 3 to 6 months, use all of the engineering resources you want to solve one problem. All of Bubble's resources, anything you want to solve one single problem that you're not working on right now. Is there one that comes to mind? What is it? How long do you think it would what are some of the challenges associated with it? I'm curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I think the big one that we're not, performance is a huge area of focus, but that's already kind of like underway. I would have said performance, right? There's no reason fundamentally why a Bubble app should be any less performant than any other app. So I would have said that, but we are starting to work on that, which is exciting. Can
you tell me more about that for a second? Because performance can mean so many different things. So like when you say you're working on performance right now, I don't know how much you're allowed to say. So whatever, if you can't say
Oh
anything,
yeah, no,
obviously don't say
it's
it. But
yeah. Like first page load performance, we do a lot of inefficient things when loading a page that are unique to decisions that we've made that result in slower page load performance. And so that also means there's a lot in our control to make that faster. And so a lot of time will be invested there. And then on top of that, there's kind of just like the snappiness of a bubble app, right? When you're like hiding and showing groups and switching pages and loading data, or like, asynchronously loading data versus synchronously loading data. Like there's a lot of those interactions which can sometimes feel like not as snappy as you would like. And so that's the second piece of performance, is like once you're in there. And a lot of that is like perceived performance versus page load, which is like if you're just looking at a blank screen for a while, like you're going to notice that, which also hurts your SEO scores, which hurts like Lighthouse scores. And so there are plenty of reasons to want to do that first, and then start focusing on more of that like reactivity, like snappiness.
so you're
But
working on performance, but what was the? I interrupted you in the middle of your
yeah,
of our little thought experiment here.
so I think it's really important. Like, but Bubble is really unique in terms of product, in that like the success of our users is not just like can they learn the tool, but like can they build a business, and then even before that, can they build a web application? And that is a huge task, right? That is a lot to ask of anyone, and I think there are some like a few key things that someone needs to learn before they'll be successful building on Bubble or coding, or because like coding is like learning the language is one part of it, but like understanding like what a web app is, how data communicates with the front end, like what API endpoints are, like what they mean, external versus internal, and like all of that needs to be learned too as a part of Bubble. Now, we have the benefit of being able to abstract a lot of those concepts, make it visual, make it easier for users to understand. But I think we're missing a lot of opportunities there. And so, yeah, if I had that 6 months unlimited budget, all my team members would kind of fundamentally rethink how a Bubble app is presented to users.
Hmm.
I think
In terms
we,
of just like educating them more about all of the different things that you're kind of abstracting away, in a
yeah,
sense.
basically, like, can we teach users how to build or what it means to build a web app through the product? I think right now you kind of you have to learn the product, but then you also kind of like in a not linear way have to learn like how to create a database, like a database schema. You have to learn kind of on your own, like how dynamic expressions are getting data from that database and putting it onto your page. You have to learn, how the workflows are actually working, the connections between all those different pieces. Like that's a lot to ingest as someone who it's their first time. And I don't think we necessarily do our users any favors with how it's set up in terms of learning those principles. We know
Hmm.
that like Bubble can be learned, and we have so many incredible apps built by people with no technical background whatsoever. So we know that like, okay, we're onto something here, but I think there is an easier path forward. And one reason why I think I was so successful learning how to code through Ruby on Rails was because they like set up a lot of stuff for you, when you like create a new Rails app, that scaffold, right? So immediately you kind of have this like baseline framework for what is a web app, right? It's an index page, it's a model, a database. Like it kind of gives you that framework, whereas you like a lot of JavaScript, you're just starting from scratch, right? And so you have that. And then it also embraces the model view controller framework. And so you have kind of three core pieces of a web app. They all have their own concerns. And if you can kind of learn each of those three and then how to link them, then, with that understanding, it becomes a lot more obvious, I think, on like, okay, how to continue building. Or if I want this functionality, cool, this is what I need to do to the view. This is what I would need to do to the controller. This is what I would need to change in the model. And so would want to kind of like steer the product in that way so that users are not only just learning the product, but they're really learning how to build.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. I was thinking about my own journey into web development, let's say, starting on Bubble. And yeah, I found Bubble. It's not an interesting story at all. It's the way that like most people find it, where they just find it on Google when they're looking to build a product. But anyways, I found it and I just fell deep into it. This was in like 2018. And for me, it was very much like a gateway drug into code. I hit a
Yep.
point with Bubble where I felt like I could do everything that I wanted to do on the platform. Thinking back now, it's funny how like little I knew at that point. But anyways, I wanted to venture into learning how to code. But I think what I hear you saying is, well, or one thought that came to mind is like, I don't know how many people, I would guess that there's probably a decent number of bubblers who just want to like build something that works and maybe aren't necessarily interested in going further and further and further into learning about web development. But what I think I hear you saying is like that could potentially be more of a problem with the way that Bubble's presented to people, and that maybe if it was presented in a different way, you'd be tapping into this part of your user that does want to learn more about web development and kind of lead them down that path. Am I understanding you right? Or
I think it's maybe providing like a cleaner or more linear path to success. And so I don't think it's
when you say
necessarily about
success, what do you mean?
like being able to like, a user that's coming to Bubble has a problem that they're looking to solve, right? And so Bubble is the tool that they have chosen. A web app is the format, and getting the user to success is they've accomplished their goal. And it could be a prototype, right? It could be a full on like web application. It could be getting that thing into the app store. It could be like an internal integration between two different tools. It could be just a hosted database. Like it could be a lot of different things. So I think regardless, the common thread there is that, we want to get to the user to success. Getting there is going to require like some level of technical understanding, right? And this, by like structuring an app in a certain way, we might be able to have like a more linear or cleaner path towards where the user wants to end up. Like I think right now the learning curve is a lot like this, right? And we have a start and you have an end point. There's a lot of, so can we make that a little bit more linear? Okay, can we like teach this piece? Can we teach this piece? Can we teach this piece? And if you've learned those, right, can you get to where you need to go a lot faster? So I think
for a lot of bubblers, the learning curve, I've seen this many times at least, and this was certainly the case for me too, is like, okay, so you're learning and learning, and you're kind of, I don't know where my camera is, hopefully, but you can like, you're kind of like going up and down, like you said. And then let's say you get to a point where you've built your app and it's good enough to release into the wild. Then you release your app and you launch, and then you drop back down again to the bottom of the learning curve when it comes to actually like running a business, if that is your goal, right? Because I know this has happened to many bubblers where you put your product out there and you realize that, people aren't just going to come to your app to use it. You actually have to market it and sell it. And that's just like a whole nother bag of worms that you have to learn. And I also think it's one thing that I think everybody in this space loves is like hearing those massive success stories. So when you think about this idea that you have in terms of a more linear path for someone whose goal it is to start their own SaaS company or whatever, let's say, build an app and make money from it, do you factor that into the product and into the roadmap?
I think there's a certain amount that we can do within the product to help users get there. Yeah, that is, I think it is related, but also like a whole really cool world to get into of like how we empower our users to not just build technology, but then build a successful business. So like, are there any like, lean development principles, like lean startup principles that we can bake into the product? Is there a platform that we can build out, or integrations that like help users understand like how their users are using their product, right? We use Amplitude to really understand user behavior. Like, our end users are building a web app, like they want to know the same thing. Same thing with like, is there a tighter integration with Stripe so you can really understand like how your business is doing things like user research, like being able to trigger like product surveys right from their Bubble app. Like there's so much like other stuff, other tools that we can build to help users do those things that are required. Like maybe there's a whole marketing or fundraising angle, right? There's like kind of this world of opportunity, I think. I was kind of, this idea is focused like on a lot smaller part of that overall journey, which is really on just like the getting to the point where you're dangerous on Bubble. And what that means is you have an idea for a feature that you want to build, and then you can like go and do that. Like you can go and build that thing. And so actually when I've been obsessed lately with like trying to define the Bubble learning curve. It's a term that gets thrown around all the time, especially internally on Twitter, like everywhere. I would love to hear from you, like what you think the Bubble learning curve is.
Just what does the Bubble learning curve mean?
Yeah, to you. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard for me to define. Like my mind goes to thinking back to when I was teaching boot camps and also when I was learning it myself. One thing that I found with students, I really enjoyed teaching the Jumpstart bootcamp because you got a lot of people that were coming in who were like brand new to anything like Bubble. Some of them maybe have like tried to code before, but it didn't work out, and they're trying Bubble now and they're really excited about it. And one thing that I think worked really well in that bootcamp is like trying to get them to a point where like some of these web development concepts are starting to click, and like it could be at a very basic level. Like once you understand a conditional expression, not just like when you see a hover effect or something on the page, but when that clicks for you, that's like a really easy, simple one. Like those moments where those like web development concepts start to click, or like a relational database is another one. And it's hard to kind of put it into a linear path, like you said, because there's so many different aspects of that, right? But the more like mini aha moments, and this is kind of like I don't know if this is a helpful answer at all, but like the more of those mini aha moments I could give quicker, I found that to be really successful. And so like by the end of, because the Jumpstart program in particular, we did it, it's like 8 hours, 4 days in a row. So 2-hour sessions for 4 days. And I always told my students at the beginning of that class that like my goal is not to show you, you're not going to learn all of the features and be able to build the next Airbnb after 4 days. But my hope is that you'll have enough of these little aha moments where you can grasp the power of Bubble and have enough of kind of a fundamental knowledge of how this platform works so that you at least like know what questions to ask and maybe where to go look for those answers. And I think really that's kind of like, for me too, when I think about my own path, I remember there was this moment where I was taking courses and learning as much as I can and consuming all the content that I could. But there was this big kind of, I think it was when I was freelancing, I took on this project, and there was one feature that this guy wanted that I didn't know how to build. And I remember thinking like, oh, but that's just what programming is. It's like going into the unknown and figuring it out. And it's more like it's more important to maybe know where to look and like how to Google something quickly to get a result and wording your questions in the right way. So I'm kind of rambling now.
No, I mean, it just brings me back to like the hours and hours and hours spent on Stack Overflow and like more, these like old school engineers being like, you're asking this question. What I think you're trying to ask is this question. You're just like, I mean, even knowing what question to ask, right? That's huge. Yeah.
Like, I don't know how programmers existed before Stack Overflow.
Same. I like whoever that genius was that self-taught themselves all this stuff without Stack Overflow.
It doesn't make any sense, but it's so true. It's like, it's like half of, I don't know what percentage of it, but like so much of it is just knowing how to find stuff quickly. And I think like the faster you can get a beginner to, number one, like have those quick little wins in terms of like conceptually understanding what they're doing, not just like putting stuff on a page. Right. And then the next level after that, like preparing them with the tools that they need to know, or that will allow them to go search for the right answers in the least amount of time.
Yeah.
What do you think it
Okay.
is?
No, I mean, my hunch is that it's more about that than the tool itself. That if, right, like you said, right, if there are these few little moments that click of like what a relational database is, like what it means, how it manifests itself in Bubble, which is very simple, right? Like a field, that's a thing, like in another thing. It's so like stupidly easy to set up in Bubble, but if you don't really like know what you're doing, you're kind of flying blind.
No, and like even saying that though, like I'm sure if someone who has, I know that some of these jumpstart students, if they heard you say that, they wouldn't know what, like what's a field. And even when you explain it, like it's kind of like a Google sheet or like what I found was really helpful is those analogies. Like everyone knows what a post is, right?
Yeah,
On a social media platform, everyone knows what a
right.
post is, and everyone knows what a comment is and how a comment relates to a post, right? So like those examples I find are quick to people understand them. Anyone can.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna need to sync offline about your curriculum and kind of these like little aha moments. Cause no, I mean, it's like figuring that out is it's a huge part of getting it right. Like we need to like empower our users to learn that. And I think if we can do that, we're going to see a lot more successful bubblers out there, that's the end goal.
One of the things that's come up in this podcast a few times, questions that I've talked about with other people in this space, is there aren't enough stories about like where are all the stories of the people who have built successful apps on Bubble? I see some, but I feel like there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot more that we don't see. Do you know of more? Do you know like maybe I have this idea that I don't know why, but people I think are hesitant to share their success stories about their Bubble built apps. I think like in part maybe because who cares about what the product is built on, but I think also in part because there's still this stigma about being built on no code. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to know what you think about that whole area.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there is work to be done in terms of shifting the narrative, and that's something that we are like actively focused on. Is like how do we shift the narrative where it is a selling point to an investor that your app was built on Bubble, not built on code. And I think there's like some easy ways, like, hey, look, we spent a month or 2 months getting something out in front of our users and iterating and iterating and iterating. And hey, by the way, that's all been done on Bubble and we can scale without ever having to build anything new, right? Like the amount of money we'll save on like development, maintenance, hosting, like issues that come along with having to, host how many fewer team members you need to build the same amount of thing, like the amount of time that you save, like, no code tool, not just Bubble, but like, I think people love the story of the savvy investor that used an Excel spreadsheet and like a form, and they like launched this big thing. Like that's no code, right? And so I think what's cool about what we're doing at Bubble is like you can apply those same principles, be super scrappy, but that can go from this little thing all the way big without having to change your tech stack. And so I think we can change the narrative, and I think we can make it where it is a strength, not like a perceived weakness. At the same time, like, I mean, we have a channel, like a Slack channel internally where we share like, funded Bubble startups or successful Bubble startups. And so I hope that those stories have a way of getting out there. We also have a badass marketing team that's really been built out over the past, I mean, even just like past few months that is focusing a lot more on, spreading the word there too. And so I think we'll start seeing and like hearing of a lot more of these success stories because there are plenty, right? There are a lot. But like you said, I think a lot of them are kind of in the shadows, right?
Yeah, and I've ranted about this before on this podcast, but I think there's also like a marketing challenge in terms of just the word no code, because it's like inherent in that word is like, hey, this stuff is easy. You can do it quick, and
Yes.
there's almost like this idea that people come to no code, they expect to build the next Airbnb. You see it too in like I was talking to a guy named Zubair who runs a Bubble
Mm-hmm.
agency, and
Yep.
he made the point that some people still, some of the clients that he interviews or has discovery calls with, they'll have very unrealistic expectations of budget, in part because it's like, well, this is no code, it's supposed to be really fast and like and easy. and they'll want like a marketplace with all of these crazy integrations built in a week for like
Yeah.
$1,000 or something, right? How do you think about that challenge of the term
Yeah.
no code?
Yeah, it is kind of a shame because it like, oh, it's super easy and it'll only take like, you can get something up in days. Kind of sets a lot of people up for failure, right? If you come in with this expectation that's really easy and that you type in a few words and you have, a fully functioning web app on your page, like a lot of people are going to be disappointed. But if you frame that on the order of weeks, like that is, you'll get way further in it's all relative, right? You'll get way further on like a no code tool in terms of functionality than you would if you had to build that all by yourself with code. But it doesn't mean that it's easy, right? Like I think fundamentally what people are trying to do is hard. That doesn't mean that, like, I think anyone is capable of learning it, right? I don't think there's anything like where it's like, no, like you wouldn't be capable of learning this. I don't think that that's true. I think anyone's capable of learning it. It's about how it's taught, how it's abstracted, how these concepts are presented, kind of like you mentioned with teaching your students. And so, yeah, I think we need to like not position this stuff as easy, but more so as like powerful and quicker or more efficient, right? Efficient might be a great way to place it. It's more efficient because you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. So I would say, yeah, more efficient is probably a better way to describe it. And then should something be cheaper? I mean, if you're kind of like paying by the hour, like sure, because it will take less time relatively. But I hope that, we're measuring that in terms of the value that's been provided, right? A bubble developer can't provide the same value as a web developer, right? Like if the end result is like Airbnb built on code, Airbnb built on bubble, the value is the exact same. The underpinnings are just different. And so, yeah, I don't want to see like I guess the value that bubble developers provide as like somehow like cheaper than web developers. So this value is the same. It's just that the rate of like it can be a lot faster relatively for someone who's experienced to build on bubble than with code.
I'm sure agencies that build on React or whatever to probably get some people coming into their discovery calls who have crazy expectations
Oh,
in
sure.
terms of
Yeah.
what can be built.
I
I'm
think
sure that
that's yeah,
happens
I think
everywhere.
that's I think that's universal.
What I told my coworkers that I was speaking with you today, and one of them wanted me to ask you what it was like for you getting started at Bubble, because I've joined many apps where Bubble built apps where there's already it's an app that has users, and it
Mhm.
takes a very long time to learn the system inside and out. And I imagine that Bubble is like that, but on a massive scale. So, what was it like for you coming in 2020 and like having to quickly understand this massive platform with all of these different tentacles? How did you figure that out?
I mean, I'm still figuring it out. Let's 2 years later, I'm still wowed by like different capabilities or flabbergasted by certain like situations. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of double. You have to learn. Our product is so complex that there's certainly a lot more to learn, but we put a pretty big emphasis at Bubble in terms of onboarding on like learning the product. So there was dedicated time to learn that. I'm like, I'm kind of obsessed with it. So like I love to build and was build bubble apps on the side. So I think that kind of helped me learn, and having a technical background helped me learn faster. And I think the thing that helped the most was how I got started. So my like kind of first thing I owned was our like bug triage process. So like I was literally reading every single bug report that came into Bubble, trying to understand what it meant and then the relative priority of those bugs. And I was working alongside of one of like the most insane engineer I've ever met in terms of just like speed and talent and intelligence, who was kind of the like able to like find and fix bugs just so much faster than anyone else. And I got to work alongside him every day for 6 months. And so just the sheer amount that I learned about like Bubble as like a product, outside of like the functionality, but just like how Bubble was built, I think really helped as well. And that kind of blossomed into one of the teams that I currently work on. And then, the responsive project, like another team that I work on was born out of that. And so like everything is kind of built upon each other. But yeah, like you think at a month you figure things out, and at 3 months you're like, I didn't know anything. And then at 6 months, I think it was really a year before you're like, okay, I like know what questions to ask now.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
can't imagine.
It was a journey for sure.
Last question for you. Where do you see Bubble in, let's say, 5 to 7 years?
I think at this point we're a household name, right? And so when anyone's talking about wanting to build something, especially in like the startup space, like Bubble is, if not the first thought, always there in the conversation as one of the options available. I think at that point, Bubble apps are just as performant as web apps. Like web apps like built on code. I think that you don't need a design tool like Figma or Framer or Sketch. Those are great, like the time and place for them. I think you don't need that on Bubble. You can mock up, wireframe, test, and build like high fidelity UIs all within the design interface. I think the product is going to look very different than it does today. And I think in 5 to 7 years, aside from like crazy, like complicated, like AI use cases, or like, live streaming VR, like anything will be possible on the tool. Like there really won't be limitations in terms of the language itself. I mean, the progress that we've made just in the past 2 years with such a small team is astounding. So, I mean, 5 to 7 years. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much for doing this. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you so much too for all the work you do on Bubble. I'm like on Bubble all the time, and it's my life. So I can't thank you and the team enough.
No, I mean, thank you. Like this was a blast. I'm I'm alone here in our office and have had so much fun. Awesome. It's also really cool to like, to get to work on a product that that you work on every day, right? Like that is really, really cool. I don't think a lot of products can say that. So yeah, so thank you. I mean, this meant a lot, and I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm very excited to talk offline about your bootcamp curriculum, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff in there that we can.
Yeah, of course. Happy to dive into that. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.